here at the Mary L. Cook Library. It's January 8th, and I'm interviewing Earl Ashworth. And if you go ahead and tell us your story.
Yeah, my name is Earl Ashworth. I'm a retired Air Force. After 26 years of active duty, I joined the Air Force in March of 1942 and finished my training. Basically, at that training, I always wanted to be a pilot. So I was lucky enough to get through all the training periods and selected to be in the single engine fighter training. So I graduated from Napier Field in July of '43, and I wanted to do the world's worst to go to China, to Europe, because all my friends over there shooting down Germans, and that's what I wanted to do. But I was sent to Randolph Field to become a flight instructor. And then I was assigned to Greenville, Mississippi to be a flight instructor in BT-13s, which was the second phase of pilot training in the Army Air Corps back in those days. And I yelled a lot about getting out and getting into tactical training, and I was on the first groups that left Greenville, Mississippi to go to fighter training, and I was sent to Chico, California, where I was checked out in P-39s. I flew that for about 30 hours, but it was I wasn't very happy with that airplane because it had a lot of dangerous flight characteristics. If you tried to do a loop in that airplane and didn't watch your airspeed, you could get into a flat inverted spin and you probably would never get out of it. A lot of pilots lost their lives that way. It snapped very easily if you got close to a stall, and sometimes it would snap 360 degrees, and before you could stop it. We were sent to, they brought in P-63s shortly after that, and that was the same type of airplane but a different wing and a different engine, and we liked that a lot better. It had a lot of characteristics, and we could do acrobatics in it very well, and we could do fighter training in it very well. And I left there and went to Tactical Reconnaissance School in Keyfield, Mississippi, and flew the P-40 and P-51 there, and was I was in tactical reconnaissance, and tactical reconnaissance is a little different than plane reconnaissance, which I should explain. The P-38s were primarily the photo reconnaissance group that was in the Air Force in those days, Army Air Corps. And they took their pictures from very high altitude and took care of a lot of landmass. The tactical reconnaissance was much different. We had to fly down low level and get a three-dimensional shot, a side angle of target, so that the interpreters could see exactly what they were looking at and determine the numbers and the sizes and shapes of weapon systems. And in that school, we had to learn all the weapon systems of the Japanese and the Germans, and also American and English, and we had to identify them very quickly. They had told us that we had to identify this within 1/75th of a second, and that is about as quick as you can bat an eye. And I didn't think I could ever do that, but they sit you down and you're not supposed to speak or make any noise at all in this class, and they put a picture on the wall, a big one, and you look at it for a long period of time, and finally you can learn to take a picture of it with your mind like you do a camera. So when I finished there, I could take a picture in my mind of a picture on the wall, and it could count the number of airplanes and be 90% accurate within 1/75th of a second. So when I went to China, I was one of the first tactical reconnaissance pilots that went there, and I had a 51 there with the K-10 camera, which shot straight down. That was a high altitude camera, and then I had the K-24, which is my low altitude camera. I was assigned to the 311th Fighter Group, and we were Shen 2 at the time, and this group had just come from Burma, where they had supported Merle's Marauders for more than a year down there. Merle's Marauders always selected our squadron, the 528 Squadron, because he said they were the most accurate with their bombing and in close dropping of weapons, because they were fighting with the Japanese at very close range back in those days in the jungle, and they had to call in supporting fire with the 51s that were flying above them, and they saw the yellow nose, they felt pretty good about calling them in and hitting very close to them. It was a tough war down there because if you got caught with the Japanese, you were probably had your head cut off. The jungles were terrible to try to live in. The lychees were about 2 to 3 inches long, and if they got on you, we were given cigarette lighters to burn them off, because if you try to pull them off, you got a lot of infections on your arms or legs or wherever they may be. We didn't have those up in China, but we did have, when we were down strafing Japanese troops and all, or taking pictures, we had a chance of getting shot down. And this time I should explain that the P-51s are not a good air-to-ground airplane. That was all the work that we did air-to-ground. There weren't many Japanese airplanes in China in those days, because that was in 44 and 45, and the pressure the Americans were putting on the Japanese in the Pacific theater was pretty tough, and they had pulled out most of their active duty airplanes in China and used them in the Pacific theater. So most of our air-to-ground stuff was for air-to-ground. We never saw any Japanese planes in the air, at least I didn't. My roommate shot one down on about the last days of the war. It was a Japanese full colonel got getting his flying time in a trainer airplane with no guns or anything, and I said, Corey, did you really shoot that guy down with no guns? He said, yeah, I did, and I felt pretty good about it. Anyway, I think that was about the last airplane that shot down in China. We flew air to ground there, and luckily enough, we lost a lot of airplanes, and luckily I never got hit any vital areas anyway. But in 51, it's a liquid cooled engine, and the scoop is underneath the scoop the air in, which is used to cool the liquid that runs around in your engine. And if you hit any part of that coolant system, from the scoop or the piping that goes up to the engine, you lost your fluid, coolant fluid, and that gave you 47 seconds to bail out of that airplane, because after that the engine gets so hot it breaks apart and blows up in your face. So you shouldn't be trying to bail out or get out of the airplane when that engine is breaking up, because you're going to get something upside your head. So the minute you saw the white streamers, when you went in on target, you kept one eye on the target and one eye on the rearview mirror. If you got hit, you looked at the rearview mirror and see if it got a white streamer. That meant your coolant was hit. And then from the coolant, then you looked at the clock, and you made sure you got out of there in 47 seconds, because if you didn't, you were in deep kitchen. You were in a lot of trouble. That was the World War II. After that, I was assigned to the 56th Fighter Group, and we flew P-47s and P-51s there, and we were the second group to be transitioned into P-80s aircraft, which were the first jets that were out in those days. And flying an airplane without a propeller was a big thing back in those days, because we were the first ones to do it. And we did a lot of air shows, trying to get some popularity with the Air Force, because Truman was president at the time. He was cutting the defense budget so drastically that we sometimes didn't have enough gas to fly. About 48 and 49 came about. The war in Europe was over, and at the time they didn't dream of anything else happening in the near future, and they never thought about Korea at the time. But the Koreans, North Koreans, I think saw that we were not well qualified in the 50s, and it would be a good time to go down and take over South Korea, and they did that militarily without any notification and surprised the United States. And we had a few troops in Korea, and a few airplanes, but not enough to get by on. And the troops went all the way down to the southern part, entered into Busan, which is the southernmost city in South Korea. And General MacArthur thought that you couldn't land a party down there and push them all back up to North Korea. But he decided to make a land at Incheon, which would tend to cut them off. And when he did that, that scared the North Koreans, so they started running back very quickly to the northern part of Korea. And we pushed them all the way back to the demarcation line. I was there flying F-86s after my tour with the the fighter group in Korea. I mean, with the fighter group in Suffrage Field in Detroit. We did a number of air shows in P-80s in those days. That was a lot of fun because I got to tell you one short story. I was with Lieutenant Martin. We were the single boys in the squadron, so we were asked to do the weekend air shows, and we were supposed to go to Des Moines, Iowa, to do a show. And normally those air shows were put on by the Civil Air Patrol, and they would ask us to participate. And normally what we would do is the Civil Air Patrol would have the other airplanes come in and do their show, and then they would ask us to come in at the very end of the show. And we'd come in on the deck at about 500 miles an hour and pull up in front of the crowd with no props and nothing. That was a big, exciting thing back in those days. And anyway, they said the show was delayed for half an hour, so they wondered if we could delay our arrival time. And I said, well, if we could find gasoline someplace. So I looked at my chart, and there's a little place called Orchard Place. And we called, and they said, yes, they just had gasoline, JP1 delivered it last week. They'd be happy to have us come in and service them. So when we were on the final approach, I said, you were the first jets to land at this little field, and if we would taxi up to the tower, they would appreciate it because some of the people like to see a jet, an airplane without a propeller. And we taxied up there, and there's about 20 very important people up there to look over our airplanes. And they were bragging about the airport while they were looking over the airplanes and saying it was going to be the biggest Northwest center of transportation, and there's going to be a lot of jets flying through there in a few years. And we were being told that the jets would not be available for commercial use for at least 20 years, and that was in 1947. So they were thinking 67 that the jets might be on the commercial route. And the fact was that we had a lot of engine failures in the early 47 because the metallurgy in the engine was not good enough to withstand the high temperatures, and we had a lot of warpage of the burner tubes and warpage of the tailpipes, and no one ever realized that the engineers would develop a metal by 1953 for them to be reliable, and the engines would be reliable enough to put on the commercial route. Of course, the first airplane, a big airplane, was the C-135, the American airplane, and that SAC had for refueling. And the Boeing used that airplane to design their 707, which had a very nice safety record, I thought, especially for just stepping into a brand new system of aviation, and to see the thrust power in those engines from in the 53s versus what we had in 1947 was just fantastic. The P-80s only had 3,300 pounds of thrust, and the engines that they're flying later on had 7,000 to 8,000 pounds of thrust. Now today they have up to 25 and 35 pounds of thrust, which is remarkable. I felt hard to visualize those big airplanes taking off with those two jet engines nowadays, even to me. So anyway, we get back to this airport thing. They asked us, so we landed there, and they bragged about being a center, and we laughed at those guys all the way out to Des Moines, and thought they were a bunch of nuts. And we landed there on the way back to Suffrage because they were really nice to us, and we thought we'd show them the jets again. So we landed there at the Orchard Place again. And if you can guess the name of that airfield today, it was O'Hara. That we landed the first jet airplanes at O'Hara in 1947. And back in those days, we were just lieutenants, and we never dreamed that that field would grow to be what it is today. But I just marvel at the foresight that those civilians in Chicago had, the ones that were looking at our jets in 1947. They knew that there was going to be big, and they had the foresight to watch for that and build for that. And if they listened to us, we thought that they were a bunch of nuts, but they weren't. They were very bright people. So after that, I went to North America and flight tested F-86 series. And then we built the T-28 there, and I tested that, and we brought in some old T-6s that we wanted to modify, use them for LT-6Gs in Korea as an airplane to fly low and be a tactical airplane for us. So I flew some of those. Then I went to Korea first in January '43. and I was with the 4th Fighter Group there, and we flew F-86s, and I was a flight test engineering officer for the 335th Squadron, and that kept me pretty busy. I didn't fly too many missions over there, and then the war was over. And I came home after that, and a good friend of mine that was over there, I flew with in China, named Snow, who was still a lieutenant in Korea with me. I was a captain, I think. And Snow stayed in the squadron level. And after the Korean flying, I stayed at the staff level and went to New York and stayed up there as a staff officer and in the Air Defense Command. And then I went to school for 9 months and was sent to Europe, and I was working for UCOM, which was the American side of NATO. I worked as a staff officer over there. I learned the military sales and military assistance programs, and we delivered F-86s to foreign nationals over there as a giveaway to them because they wanted to build a defense force and they didn't have the money at the time. So we gave away a lot of F-86s and F-84s to all the people over there, and we tried to, we were the first ones to put some airplanes into Ethiopia too. We put T-33s in Ethiopia, and they did real well with them. But they had trained, they had the Swedish people down there to run their Air Force, and the only people they had in their Air Force were Swedes. And the Swedes told us that you couldn't teach those guys how to fly. But we did, and made the Swedes look very silly. And the Ethiopians flew and did really quite well. We also, as a reminder now that we're talking about Iraq, in 1959 we put the first airplanes in Iraq when that was before the coup, of course. The Prince was in charge over there. He was one of the, a cousin to one of the Sauds over in Saudi Arabia, and he lived real high on the hog. He had a big palace in Baghdad, and I looked over the fence and saw it, and it was a beautiful place. But all the Iraqi people I met were really great people. Most of them went to college in Beirut at the Western University in Marseille. They were used to Western terminology and Western influences. They were pleased about our democracies and wanted to follow in our footsteps. And we're going to give them some airplanes and teach them how to fly. And in those days, the Iraqis didn't have any Iraqi people either. They had English pilots to fly their airplanes. And the English told us, as they did down in Ethiopia, that you're not going to teach these guys how to fly airplanes. And we did, and they did a really good job. We got two of the first F-86s down there, and then the Prince was overthrown and killed. And the Army Major General in Iraqi Army Major that we'd worked with all that time was killed. He was dragged through the streets of Baghdad behind a 4x in a truck until he was left of him, I guess. Anyway, this guy, Army General that did the coup, was an extremely cruel person. But he didn't last too long either. About a year and a half later, Saddam Hussein came along and knocked him off, and he was killed. And Saddam Hussein has maintained his efforts and his control over the Iraqis, and put them under a dictatorial type rule. If you don't follow in his footsteps or brag about him, you have to get your tongue cut out or get killed or something. You don't even have to be his enemy. He just might want to decide if you're a woman, he might want to take you up to his one of his places and do cruel things to you. The English intelligence report that just came out said he'd like to see men tortured in various ways. So I don't want to talk about it on the air now, but he did really miserable tortures. He still does. He likes to have his little fun by having people up there that he puts through a lot of torture before they die, and that seems to be a good thing for him to do. So I think that President Bush is right. If whether he's got all those weapons or not, he's a real cruel dictator. If we could take him out of there and give the Iraqis back a democracy, and I think they would follow democracy real easy, because when I was down in 1959, all the people I knew were really great admirers of the Western type of governments, and I don't think it'd be hard at all to teach them or encourage them to go in a democratic way. So after my trip to Hawaii for 4 years, I was involved with programming of foreign aid for the South Vietnamese for 4 years, and I revamped their whole Air Force at the time. But I could see we were losing the war, and but I got to tell you that before we got involved in that war, Admiral Felt was a four-star admiral, and he was in charge of the entire Pacific Theater, and he was the most remarkable man, I think, remarkable officer, you know, that I ever ran across. A Army general came up from Vietnam who was in charge of the military assistance group down there in Saigon, and told the admiral that if he would give him one part of one Army division, that he could restore law and order in South Vietnam. That was in 1950, early 63. And the admiral said if we put troops down there that they'll get killed and be taken prisoners, and we have no way of getting them back, and we'll be in another undeclared situation like we got involved in Korea. He said if we think that if our government thinks that the VC should be punished, let them the Congress declare war and tell the Army, the military to get on with it. But I don't want to put the ground troops down there. And the general came up the second time and asked for ground troops, and the general said no. Admiral said no. It'd just be another losing situation unless we declare war. I don't think we should be down there. And very bright scholar. And so the Kennedy, the general went around Admiral Felt to General Wheeler, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, and apparently he convinced Wheeler that the ground troops should be in Vietnam, and Wheeler no doubt convinced Dean Rusk, and who convinced President Kennedy at the time, and they put in a partial of the 1st Cavalry Division and part of the 25th Infantry Division first of all. And Admiral Felt was opposed to that, but he was overruled by the Washington hierarchy, and they put some ground troops down there, and it wasn't long before they started getting killed and being taken prisoner, as Admiral Felt indicated that they would. Pretty soon we were in a war. Mr. Johnson said he was going to get that damn war over with, and he put in a whole bunch more troops down there. And I think when Mr. Nixon became president in 1978, 68, I think that we had over 500,000 people in Vietnam. And when Nixon came in, and he started pulling most of them back, the non-combatants back, and he also decided to bomb North Vietnam, which we weren't allowed to do, and he said, go ahead and do it. That was the only way we were going to get these guys to talk to us and get our prisoners back. We had no other leverage at all except to bomb to get our American prisoners back. And they were at the peace table in Paris with our Secretary of State, and North Vietnam got up and left the table, I think, on 2 occasions anyway. And each time, President Nixon told them to go ahead and bomb them, and they did. So finally, the Vietnamese thought that there's a crazy man head of our government, and they better get back to Paris and start negotiating. So if it hadn't been for Nixon and his stubbornness to bomb, we may not have ever gotten our prisoners back. They might have killed them all. Anyway, as far as we know, we got them all back. Anyway, it was a bloody war that we should never have been in, and it all turned out just as Admiral Felt said it would. That we lose a lot of men, we lose a lot of money, and the Russians would be very happy to see us spend our money on that instead of on missiles. That's why Russia helped prolong the war as long as possible, so that they kept us tied up in a war over there that they could go ahead. And that's the period of time when they got ahead of us in missiles. So anyway, after that I was just assigned to staff duty and in New York, and then I went to a school, and then I went to Paris for 4 years and worked over there. And then I came back to Oklahoma for only 9 months. Then I was sent to Hawaii to do the same type of a job over there that I was in Paris. And then I came back to Wright-Patterson and retired in 1965. I have won the Distinguished Flying Cross. We are now making up a fraternity of Distinguished Flying Cross members. We have 18 members, I think, right now in the Dayton area, and I think we'll get a lot more in the next year and a half. And that means that people who flew and did something extensive, they work in the air, got the Flying Cross. I have the Air Medal, and I have the Combination Medal from the Army and Navy and Air Force and Joint Services Command. That's about the end of my military career. I'm retired now and write short stories.
Okay. Are you married?
I'm married and have 3 children. One girl is, my daughter's in Cuyahoga Falls, and she has one son who's now 17, and he's in a private school that costs $25,000 a year in high school, $25,000 a year, and he's a musician, and he won a $20,000 scholarship for his junior year and senior year. We're real proud of him. And my son is, one son is in Fort Pierce, Florida, and he has 2 boys, and both are really scholars. One is in the 5th grade, one's in the 1st grade, and they both make really good grades. We're very pleased with them. And I have one son at home still who doesn't want to get married, and he's having a hard time getting around to college, and we're having a real problem with him breaking up, getting away from the family. I have, so I think that covers the story about who my family members are and where they are.
Okay. You said you flew P-39s earlier. You said they had bad flight characteristics.
P-39s?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that because the engine was mounted in the back behind the pilot?
No, the engine was right underneath the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So the center of gravity was very easy because you sit right on the center of gravity. So it was ready to do acrobatics, but the wing design was wrong, and then of course the engine was bad because it overheated very easily. We had to call and get takeoff instructions before we started the engine. We got the takeoff instructions, then we started the engine, and we ran like hell to get to the end of the runway, and before the engine overheated. Once we started going down the runway, the temperature started going down again. But you couldn't taxi the airplane around very long. So when the P-63 came out, they put a new wing on it, they put a different engine in it. Mm-hmm. And otherwise it was pretty much the same.
Right.
I liked seeing up there in that little needle nose in that airplane. We could go down and almost chop wheat with it in California. If you wanted to see what's on at the local theater, we'd just go down and buzz the city and see what was on. They permitted that during wartime. They don't do it anymore.
Right. Let's see. When you flew the P-51s, you flew mostly out of China, and you flew tactical reconnaissance.
In China, I flew the early model P-51s, the B model when I first got there, and then I didn't let them know I was a tactical reconnaissance pilot right away because I wanted to fly tactical missions so I could shoot my guns. But the squadron commander called me in one day and said he was looking through my records, and he noticed we have numbers that would tell us, would qualify what we did. Mm-hmm. Like a 1034 was a fighter pilot on your record. A 1051, I believe, was a tactical reconnaissance pilot. And he said, "Do you know anything about tactical reconnaissance?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "I see 1051 here on your record." He said, "That in the book that says you're a tactical reconnaissance pilot." I said, "Oh, there must be some kind of administrative error." He said, "I also see on the record you graduated from Key Field, Mississippi." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "That's a tactical reconnaissance school, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." He said, "Then on the tactical reconnaissance pilots that graduate there." "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, there's P-51 over here in the next base to join us with the 81st Fighter Group, and you go over there by noontime today and start flying that airplane." So after that, I was assigned to the 81st Fighter Group for 4 months, and I must say that was a real experience. The group commander was a real genuine hero in my view. It was a P-47 group, and he always teased me about flying the 10 Lizzie. But I brought back a lot of good pictures for him. I brought back a picture of him when he had dropped we wanted to find out if we could burn a bridge down. So he said, "How about taking a picture of me, Ashworth, and taking a picture of that bridge and see if we're going to set it on fire." So when we went over, he dropped his napalm on it, right on it. Didn't miss it at all. And I flew right over with him, and he was looking up to see me, and I wasn't more than 10 feet above him. And I snapped a picture of him going across, and you could almost recognize him looking up because he had his mask off, he's flying low, and he has a little mustache. And he thought that was the best picture in the world, and it was. He thought I'd planned it all, but really it was quite accidental. I didn't think I was going to get that kind of a good picture, but I did. Anyway, after I did that way, I could do no wrong with the diversified group. I did quite well. I brought back a lot of pictures that that was critical to them. And then I went back to my squadron, and they started letting me fly tactical missions because we had another for the tactical reconnaissance pilot, and then we could swap around a little bit. But toward the end of the war, I wrote an article about this. It was about the Yellow River Bridge in China. It was the biggest bridge that they had. It was well fortified, and it was the bridge that connected Shanghai with Beijing, and all the supplies used that railroad. There was 2 railroads going up and down, and the Japanese used it quite heavily, moving equipment around. So one of our jobs there was to keep the trains from moving too much. So we'd go down and shoot up those trains a lot. But when you see a freight train going down the road about 60 miles an hour, you pop the engine with your 50 calibers, and they get the boiler, and it looks like a porcupine going down the road because of all the number of hits you got on it. You could always tell because the steam would come out of it, out of the engine. And we'd stop the engines, and that was probably the biggest problem that they had, I guess. Go up the bridges and shoot up the engines, and we kept them pretty busy doing all that. But it was we would go into railway yards and shoot up the engines too, and we always had a lot of return fire because we had a gun tower on each side of the tower, and we had gun towers that we had to knock out, and then we'd go in and strafe the engines. If you never got the gun tower, it'd be very risky to go in there. The Yellow River Bridge, toward the end of the war, my squadron commander called me and said, I need to do something. And what's that? He said the Japanese have been reported to build a radar site just north on the riverbank at the Yellow River Bridge, and they put it up there so it could be well protected by the guns on the bridge. So we need a picture of it. We've never seen one of their radar installations. So we're asking you if you think if you could go up there and get a little picture of that. Well, that meant flying 90 degrees over that bridge. And they shot down they said whole squadrons of B-25s, and they shot up a lot of the fighters. I know that because their fire was so accurate and there were so many of them. Anyway, I said, well, we'll have to give it a shot. So I took off with one wingman and dropped him about 30 miles west of the bridge. And me and the squadron commander worked out a deal with the engineering officer on the airplane. We had decided if I was cruising at 250 miles an hour at 8,000 feet, I pulled the throttle back. I could go steep enough to build up a speed of 400 miles an hour. And then I could level off at ground level and slowly add throttle to it to keep the 400 miles an hour. That way I could get over the bridge at 400 miles an hour. And that way I would surprise the gunners because you'd be right on their deck going around. So we agreed that I'd do that. So I dove down on the river at the exact point where I was supposed to get. And the riverbank's about 10, 12 feet high above me, and I was way below them. There's riverbanks. And I made a turn to the right to go around a little curve there, and right in front of me was that damn big Yellow River Bridge. A huge thing, and it had guns all over it. I set my camera for a 50% shoot, so you get a lot of overlap. And we thought that if I went over there and just got above that bridge, maybe 50 feet above it, and get a picture of that gun tower. I'd be almost out in the middle of the river, though, because I have to be away from it. I went over it, and boy, there's more like there than I ever saw. That's the most ivory I shot at, I think. The flag kept bursting in front of me, and I kept thinking I should throttle back. But we agreed that 400 miles an hour should be the exact speed to go across there, and I did. And they never did hit me that I could feel, anyway. So I went across there and took the pictures. Dug down in the river after I got the pictures, and made a left turn around the bend, which then they couldn't see me. And then I climbed back up to 8,000 feet, went back, picked up my wingman, and went home. And when I got out of the airplane, my crew chief said, what did you do this time? I always told him. And he said, I said, look close for holes. You ought to find plenty. He looked over the airplane real close, and I didn't have a single hole in the airplane. Really shocking to me that I never got shot down or killed or something. I would think with all these people shooting at me, if one of them got in the cockpit with me, it'd been disaster for me. But the pictures were good. And you know what? The higher command who wanted these never gave me a thank you for it or anything else. I sit back in their rocking chair and looked at them and thought, well, like you looked at these pictures, put them on the table.
Yeah. When you were working for NATO, working with sending
in Paris,
right, working to get the F-86s overseas, were you involved with the project of sending the F-86s to Germany? Because that was like a big deal. That they were, the Luftwaffe was back. They actually had planes.
Well, at the time I was there, the Germans were still awfully heavily damaged from the war. Mm-hmm. Really, I don't know how the Germans held on to the war as long as they did, because I believe the pictures I've seen of Germany all over, there's complete destruction every place. Hitler was indeed a madman to keep the war going that long and causing the German people so much suffering. I don't think that our command wanted to keep bombing, but they wouldn't give up. And they had to give up, and even at the very end they did want to give up. However, I've been to Germany, and I've met a lot of good Germans, and I'm sure that some of them liked Hitler one time. But the fact was that that war was sort of caused by the Allies. It was after World War I. We had tied the Germans down so tight after World War I that they couldn't do anything. They weren't allowed to have an air force or aviation at all. They weren't allowed to do a lot of development in their country, and the people were hungry and they were starving. And the many Germans I talked to who were senior citizens said that they would go out and rent a farmland from farmers so they could grow food, just to grow food to eat. You can buy it. If somebody got food, they kept it in their house. They didn't take it to the store or anything to sell it. It was really bad right after the war, and no matter how much we tried to help them, but still there was a lot of hatred immediately after the war. You don't just stop shooting people and then start hugging their neck. We didn't like them and they didn't like us. Not for the longest time. Even when I was there in the late 50s, I could tell that they thought we shouldn't have been over there. I don't think they really like us being there today. I would like to say that the Germans told me that since they were allowed to have any aviation at all in the country, they had to use gliders. And the guys who flew in World War II learned how to fly gliders, for example, on the weekends, because they were allowed to have any flying airplanes or any schools. And so they tried to do their best in flying. There's a lot of early up their wings started doing that. So after a certain period of time, Hitler decided to hell with the Allies. I'll just fly airplanes anyway, and he started doing it and building airplanes of his own. And that's when he decided that the Allies were not going to stop him, number one. Number two, they deserve any person to get, number two. And number three, I guess, is they went ahead and did it. And no one, as they forecasted, no one said anything about it. Even 1938 was that when Chamberlain went over there and was actually he was sort of threatened in a way. But Hitler told the German people that the Allies had stolen everything from them over a period of years, and that we never want to care for the Germans, and he taught the Germans to hate the Allies. And he was a good speaker, and he was emotional, and that was something that the Germans were very apt to catch on to, and they did. But if they'd been more lenient with Germany after World War I, they might not have had a Hitler. They were just hungry and wanted something to do, and Hitler came along and said, I'll lead the government, and I'll make sure you get everybody's going to have a Volkswagen, everyone's going to have enough to eat, and the workers are going to get paid properly, and he did. He did all this. I don't know how he did it, but he did it.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Anything you want to say for posterity?
Of course, being a military man, I'm a little concerned about what the situation that we have today. It's too bad that Iraq has gone as far as they have. I think that the amount of military movement that we're doing right now is more to threaten Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and making sure that he knows that we're serious and we're going down there and we really intend to stop him. So he knows that we're not kidding, and we're publicizing our troop movements, I think, so that he will know that we're going down there. And hopefully he'll get scared enough, if we move enough people down there, that he'll decide to give up before we have to go in. I'm hoping that's what will happen. But I don't know, I don't think he has that mentality like the rest of those guys do over there. If it gets that bad, I'll just let him commit suicide, and he'll commit suicide or go out and get himself killed. But not by a Jewish person or an American person. He'll get killed some other way. So I think that's about all I need to say.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.